Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound Browns 3D. Now here on the OBR, your host, Jeff Lloyd. Hope everybody had a fantastic weekend, of course. Great games. Certainly Washington Commanders with a very, very impressive effort Saturday evening. Eagles able to survive late against the Los Angeles Rams, staving off a comeback. And it's tough. Mark Andrews, obviously the drop is egregious, certainly. But Mark Andrews becoming a meme, certainly is a sad state of affairs. Mark Andrews, just an absolutely incredible talent. And just tough spot, man. Just tough spot. Just shows to show you how much, things can change in the NFL in just a split second. And I'll be honest with you, I was hoping he was catching it. I wanted more. I wanted overtime. So we'll head to championship weekend. Of course, the Washington Commanders traveling to face the Philadelphia Eagles. And again, Josh Allen, Buffalo Bills, headed on out to face the Kansas City Chiefs. Your big NFL news of the day just dropped shortly. Ben Johnson, now the former offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions, will now be the head coach of the Chicago Bears. Caleb Williams hopefully gets what he needs. Johnson gets the opportunity to prove himself on a bigger stage. The Browns will face the now Ben Johnson-led Chicago Bears when they travel out to Chicago next year in 2025 to face the Bears. I was thinking about, things of, how we were going to do this week. And it's not going to be a lot of breaking news, certainly for the Cleveland Browns. And this is a series I've wanted to get to. And look, there's so much bantering about whether or not you guys are going to trust Andrew Berry and his staff to handle this offseason in this draft. Well, we're going to, obviously. But I thought we'd do some, looking back, and we peek behind the curtains here a little bit. And we do about 5 shows a week. Sometimes we'll do more. And Andrew Berry's had 5 draft classes to this point. So why don't we kick it off with the 2020 draft class? Just to refresh everybody real quick, Jedrick Wills, Grant Delpit, Jordan Elliott, Jacob Phillips, Harrison Bryant, Nick Harris, and Donovan Peoples-Jones. That was the original draft class for Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski. Now, Jed Wills, certainly, this was always an interesting pick, and it was going to be looked at and definitely, viewed for a long time to come. The Cleveland Browns, and certainly with a lot of influence from then new offensive line coach Bill Callahan, essentially pegged Jedrick Wills as his left tackle to start, this regime here with Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski. Of course, they did that without ever seeing Jedrick Wills play an ounce of left tackle. So as much as people always want to get on Jed, and, we're going to talk a lot about Jed here, obviously. You do have to keep in mind there is a lot of culpability here from the Browns themselves in drafting a player to play a position that they had never seen him play before. Andrew Thomas went earlier in this draft, and, Andrews kind of solidified himself over with the New York Giants over the years. Mekhi Becton went right after Jed, now the starting right guard for the Philadelphia Eagles. Did get dumped on his butt yesterday by Jared Verse. Just goes to show you what kind of player Jared Verse is. And then Tristan Wirfs, who went on to become an all-pro at both right tackle and left tackle. Now, I think Jed's career probably started, I would say rookie year started pretty good. And certainly this was on a team, that, went to the playoffs that year. Jed was not a star. But I think a lot of people, and this is probably where it got, certainly up to, a lot of debate on Jed Wills, was I think everybody thought what they saw his rookie year, that there was going to be, a marked improvement. And he was maybe really going to start to show signs of being worthy of that number 10 overall selection, as the years went on, as everybody thought and just assumed he would get comfortable in the role at left tackle. It certainly did not. First game of his second year. Anybody remembers he got hurt significantly against Kansas City Chargers, carted off the field, still managed to go out and play the rest of the season. And this is where it got tough because, I will tell you right now, and I will be completely honest with you, I am up and down on a guy like Jedrick Wills in his time that he was here as anybody. There were times where, especially his rookie year, I thought, he was impressive. Then his second year, I kind of actually started to like him, knowing how injured he was, but yet he was still finding his way to get out there every year. Then year 3, we're starting to see those, and I've always called them pause button moments, where you see 21 other players on the field still in motion, still doing their assignments, and you saw 71 just like a deer in the headlights, which was most likely he didn't know exactly where he should be. And there's a phrase that you hear a lot, when guys are, scouting offensive linemen or evaluating offensive line tape, and it's looking for work, which means even if you were making a mistake, even if you were not sure of your assignment, you're still going 100% and you're just finding a way to get your body on a body. And certainly that was a big, big issue for Jedrick Wills. And, then of course, last year in 23, missed a boatload of time again with an injury. And Browns still went on to make the playoffs. Jerron Christian actually played pretty well for this team down the stretch that year. And then now you were in this weird position, and the Browns were in a weird position with a couple of players going from 23 to 24. Certainly Amari Cooper, certainly Jedrick Wills. These were guys that they probably, in their heart of hearts, probably wanted to move on from. But, at the time, Amari, you had already made the move for Wells. So as much as you were maybe already for Jerry Jeudy, as much as you were thinking about moving on, you had already created a bigger issue with Amari Cooper, which they satisfied with the contract. But for Jed, he was injured, so he missed almost everything. He was, difficult. He was kind of late getting to the party here in 2024, injured. And obviously his play this year was just bad. And probably this year may have been his worst year ever. And there's always been penalties with Jedrick Wills. There's always been, times where he's gotten beaten. There were, again, like those pause button moments, like I mentioned earlier. Just a really, really up and down time for Jedrick Wills in his 5 years here with the Browns. And I'll be honest, and there are a lot of people, there was a war on Twitter years ago about Jed and his 5th-year option. And I was one that said, I don't know if it's a damn certainty that there is going to be a 5th-year option. The Browns did eventually cave, of course. Jed got that 5th-year option. But we're not going to call Jedrick Wills a bust. Okay, that's going too far. Jedrick Wills, if he was healthy, would have been a left tackle and a starting left tackle for this franchise for 5 seasons. There's nothing at all that is a bust when you have a player that would have done that for your team. Now, it certainly was not a fantastic selection. It was not a great selection. It was probably a below average selection in Jedrick Wills at 10 overall. But bust we're not going to do. He was not a bust, and to deem him as one is definitely taking it to the extreme and probably not knowing how most of this works. Definitely not a bust. Certainly not a great pick. Probably a below average pick. And the Browns will always have as much culpability in the failures and the ineffectiveness of Jedrick Wills Jr. as Jedrick Wills Jr. himself should have. I still think about this selection, and I remember, it was a couple weeks before the draft, and Pete Smith here at the OBR, my good buddy, kept trying to bring Grant Delpit here to the Browns in round 2. My honest belief was he just was not going to be available. I just didn't see how it was going to work out. But Grant, who had an ankle injury towards the end of that magical season. End of a great season, certainly with the LSU Tigers. And, I think he got dinged for playing through the injury and probably took away his first round status, put him in the second round. And, the Browns just absolutely jumped. Career started extremely slow. Now, you got to remember, this was COVID. This was the height of COVID. So basically, we had the NFL Combine, and that was it. It was the weirdest offseason in the NFL ever. But that's, and then, Grant, I guess it was maybe first, second, third practice, maybe second or third. And this is when the Browns were posting and showing the practices on YouTube during COVID, if nobody remembers. And Grant Delpit, tore the Achilles, and it was brutal at the time because what you saw on tape was that Grant Delpit was basically lining up everywhere. He was playing free safety. He was playing strong safety. He was lining up as a linebacker. He was covering running backs and tight ends and man coverage. And the Browns were going to put everything on that rookie safety in 2020. Sadly got hurt. Came back in 21. Started slow, and understandably so, coming back from an Achilles injury. Then it started to pick up play, and it started to closed out really, really, really well. Dinged up, bruised and battered towards the end. Then in 2022, it was the same case. Started slow again, but by the end of 2022, you saw the high-end play of Grant Delpit. 23 was a little bit of the opposite. Started off great. And then I believe it was the Jaguar game when he got hurt and then just inevitably never made it back. And, if you all remember, the day he got hurt was the day the contract extension was, announced. It was announced either the Saturday before or Sunday before the game that the Browns had signed Grant Delpit long-term. Went on this year here in 2024, was the Browns' leading tackler. One of my favorite players on this team right now to watch. High competitor. There are times where he can play some free safety. It's not his best role. Keeping everything in front of him, Grant just excels. Just a great, great, great talent. Quick to the ball, great knowledge, great instincts. You can tell he is definitely a guy that watches the tape and is a big film review guy. So, for Grant Delpit, now this was a very good selection. It really was, because there was a lot of people who had Grant Delpit carrying around one grade. The Browns were able to get him in round 2. It was right around pick 41, 42, if I remember correctly. And, even though it started slow and, the whole rookie season washed out, started slow in 21, started slow in 22. Once Grant Delpit got it all back and started to get out there and get reps and started playing with some real other solid players on that defense, it really, really just, took off for him. And we'll see a way it works, because you probably have a good feeling, certainly, that there's going to be a lot of changes in the Browns secondary. Juan Thornhill most likely will not be back. McLeod has retired. It's Hickman and it's DeAnthony Bell after that. So the safety market is certainly going to be something to watch for the Cleveland Browns here in the 2025 offseason as they try to build that room around the one sure thing they have. And that certainly is now number 9, Grant Delpit. Jordan Elliott. Jordan Elliott was a PFF darling that draft cycle. I believe he was a top 30 player, might even be a top 25 player under the PFF lens, which means graded out wise. And, statistical output was not shocking. Certainly wasn't something that just popped. Jordan Elliott played a lot of football starting for this team. Was here all 4 years of his rookie contract. Did go on to the San Francisco 49ers. There was never just that big moment for Jordan Elliott other than a couple of blocked kicks. Was he a essential part of the defensive line? No. Was he a good part? And this is the problem, and you got to keep in mind, the Browns' defensive tackle rotation in those days just was not good. It just wasn't. They didn't, have a lot of good players, which forced Jordan Elliott to play a boatload more than he should have. And, certainly has probably found his role in this league as a rotational piece, as, a lot of the defensive tackles the Browns drafted early on in the infancy of this regime turned out to. They were just taking guys too early, and they didn't prioritize the position enough. You're new, you want a defensive tackle to be a starter. Drafting that guy in round 3 is not really a huge expectation. Defensive tackles and good defensive tackles go early. You want to draft a starting defensive tackle, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. If you want to force it, you can, which is what they did with a pick like Jordan Elliott. And, you've heard me mention, a couple times here now in the last week or so that the Browns, always aren't viewing each individual position, in my opinion, correctly as, where to select them as to what you are expecting out of them. And that was certainly a case with Jordan Elliott. Just was never the guy they were hoping he could be. And just because they didn't make enough contingency plans beforehand or after, ended up being a full-time starter for pretty much the entire time he was here. To say again that a guy was drafted where he was, started for your team for 4 years, it's saying it's a victory, but in this case, in my opinion, it would be saying it was a moral victory. Jordan Elliott, again, was never a great player for this team. Serviceable is how I would describe Jordan Elliott and his tenure here with the Cleveland Browns. Now, this is one that still makes me a little bit sad. I had nailed and predicted Jacob Phillips to the Cleveland Browns had to be minimum 2 months before the draft, if not longer. You remember we were all watching a lot of LSU in those days, right? A lot of LSU guys came out around this time. And, everybody was so amped up over Patrick Queen. And every time I watched LSU's defense, my eyes weren't on number 8, Patrick Queen. My eyes were always on number 6, Jacob Phillips. I was infatuated with him. His production was off the charts. Had good size at 6'3", 240. And there were moments early in Jacob Phillips's time here with the Browns that were certainly really, really good. If you go back to the 2020 game where Jacob was a rookie in Dallas when they beat the Cowboys, Jacob Phillips had a 3-play sequence where I think it was a tackle for loss, and a pass breakup in the 3-play sequence. If you remember the clinching game in 2020 against the Pittsburgh Steelers, Jacob Phillips was everywhere in that game. Probably ended up with like 13 total tackles, 13 combined tackles. It was just a menace and a nuisance that day for a Cleveland Browns defense. Then came, that offseason, and I believe at the time they were working out with the New York Giants. And, it was, the bicep or the tricep. Then the following year, there was another injury. Then the year after that, I do believe it was the pec that he tore. So as promising as Jacob Phillips was as a rookie, and I really thought there was going to be a huge role for him as a linebacker for this team, in the infancy of his career, just every year just ended up with Jacob Phillips being on IR. Was signed by the Houston Texans last offseason, didn't make the team out of training camp, has just been signed in the past couple of days to a futures reserve contract with the Indianapolis Colts. The pick didn't hit, obviously, had all the potential in the world to hit. But this is one where, I don't think, and look, I guess what we're trying to do here is establish, who won here. The fans who think Andrew Berry is terrible or Andrew Berry. I don't think there's a winner here. Jacob Phillips had all the potential in the world after his rookie season and really looked like he was going to be a big-time contributor for the Cleveland Browns defense for years to come. Injuries did him in, and it was basically over quicker than it even started for Jacob Phillips. One of my favorites, absolutely, was then. Loved him out of LSU. Thought he was going to be a great player for this team, but unfortunately just could never, ever avoid the injury bug. Harrison Bryant, and this was always an interesting one because, he went to, I guess it was Florida Atlantic, had been a high school receiver, went to Florida Atlantic as a wide receiver. They bulked him up a little bit. He'd won the tight end award that year in college. Was never going to be a big time blocker, and they thought they kind of had something. And this is kind of interesting because you got to remember now, like I keep talking about, I want a better tight end room. 2020, the tight end room, was full of some serious names. They weren't sure about David Njoku, so they, at the time did not keep him around. They had drafted Harrison Bryant, had signed the tight end in free agency. It was a really good group. And, that's probably the most individual talent they've ever had. I'm sorry, I'm talking about Austin Hooper, obviously, in that room at one time. This is what I want now. I'm begging for them to do this now. I want more guys in there. But you had, at the time, this regime wasn't sure on David Njoku. And certainly David busted his butt. And even by the end of 2020, David Njoku was already playing better football than Austin Hooper. And Harrison Bryant brought a little something to this team. They can line them up a little bit more on the outside. So much changed in the time Harrison Bryant was here. But again, this is a guy that played an entirety of his rookie contract here with the Cleveland Browns. Went on, ironically enough, to the Las Vegas Raiders, where it was, third tight end in a tight end room that was just stacked with guys with Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer. And we'll see where Harrison Bryant goes in 2025 as he only signed a 1-year deal. But that was a player, I think the Browns could have used more of. There'll always be that one Monday night game where Nick got hurt in Pittsburgh and first play was thrown to Harrison Bryant. Ball went off his hands. We all know the rest. Pick six, blah, 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 blah. Harrison Bryant, there was a lot of great potential there. I think the Browns just didn't know exactly what to necessarily do with Harrison Bryant. Nick Harris. Now, this is kind of funny to think about that Nick Harris was already drafted in 2020. His career was done with the Cleveland Browns, leaves in free agency, comes back this year due to injury, gets the opportunity to start, suffers yet a second major season-ending injury with the Cleveland Browns. Now, Nick was really liked in the draft cycle in 2020. The big knock that everybody that you asked across the board is undersized. Didn't have enough arm length. His body just didn't have enough weight. He was just an undersized player trying to play on the interior. Nick Harris, and if everybody remembers when training camp started in 2020, we found out like a day before that at the time starting center J.C. Tretter had a procedure done on his knee. And, it was going to be a little while before he was ready. It turned out he was ready for week 1. But basically, Nick Harris was the starting center the entirety of training camp. And in those days, J.C. Tretter was barely practicing. I mean, he was coming out on Friday, basically getting a feel of the game plan that was put in, and then was just going and playing the games on Sunday. So Nick Harris, his first 2 years in the NFL with the Cleveland Browns, was essentially the starting center for the Browns, except for game day. Did get a couple of starts, a couple opportunities. I believe that one of them was Christmas Day in Green Bay. That would have been probably 21. Was set to be the starter in 2022. And that is when, suffered the knee injury in the first preseason game against the Jacksonville Jaguars at the time. That gave Ethan Posick the path to the starting job that he just was never going to relinquish. So then, from 2023, the season played out, Nick Harris and then left in free agency. Posick went down. The Browns brought Nick Harris back as quickly as possible. Again, started a little bit, had another devastating injury, and then the season was over. Nick Harris, probably, I think most people are going to view it as a loss as far as the pick that Andrew Berry made. But I think there's a lot more about Nick Harris that people don't truly understand. And, for a day 3 pick, round 6 pick, round 5 pick, Nick Harris, the potential was there and the opportunity was there. And just, unfortunately for Nick Harris, some bad luck came at, some really, really bad times for him, unfortunately. Now, this is the last pick we'll talk about, and I do want to give some thoughts here a little bit on the Natty tonight. Donovan Peoples-Jones. To this date, this is still the best wide receiver selection that Andrew Berry has made for this team. And I remember recording the morning of day 3 of the draft. And I know a lot of people, you know the name and you probably read his work. He's not doing Brown's work anymore. But Jeff Risdon. Jeff's always been a really, really good friend in the community. And, you know, we had been talking, we did a show that morning talking about what the Browns had done to that point. So obviously, of course, we were getting to what we think the Browns would do to close out day 3. And Jeff in Michigan, you know, that morning there was a lot of chatter, and it was coming out from a lot of people that the Browns had a lot of interest in Donovan Peoples-Jones. And you got to remember, a lot of people, you know, had issues with Donovan, and I think a lot of their issues were he just wasn't involved enough in the offense. Michigan wasn't throwing the ball much anyway. And the other thing was there were some people who actually had issues with the fact that Donovan Peoples-Jones was so focused on his academics. And there were people that were trying to use that as an excuse for why Donovan Peoples-Jones wasn't all he could be on the field. Well, rookie year, Odell goes down. Donovan kind of gets thrust into some playing time, has that ridiculous game-winning touchdown catch and a big catch before that against the Cincinnati Bengals on the road. Then has that monster play-action double move go against the Tennessee Titans in another route the Browns had that year. And then 2022, with Jacoby Brissett, Donovan Peoples-Jones was in the zone. Donovan Peoples-Jones was playing extremely well. It slowed down a little bit when Deshaun came back, as most of the offense did in 2022. And then 2023, there were just more guys here now, and there was more competition here, and Donovan kind of got faded out and phased out. I do think the Browns still made a right move by moving him at the deadline they did to the Detroit Lions. Donovan then in the offseason did re-sign with the Detroit Lions. But, you know, to be fair on this one, this is probably one of the better overall selections that Andrew Berry has ever made, you know, in his draft history with Cleveland. I mean, he was on pace for 1,000 yards in 2022 before Deshaun Watson came back. He was playing extremely well. He was consistent with his hands. There were no drops. He was learning how to run routes, track the ball. Everything was clicking for Donovan Peoples-Jones in those times. So you go over this class again, and you look at it, and of course it was Jed Wills over 1. And again, you know, Jed Wills isn't a bust. Browns didn't win on this selection by any means whatsoever. But Jedrick Wills was not a bust. Grant Delpit, everybody will call that pick a win. Jordan Elliott, probably not a win. Okay. Jacob Phillips, an incomplete. Nobody gets a victory there, but a player that had a ton of potential. Harrison Bryant, you know, for a third tight end, I think what he was doing was certainly serviceable. Let's not forget, you know, those, you know, obviously tush pushes that Harrison Bryant was doing towards the end of his time here. Nick Harris, I'll call a win. Donovan Peoples-Jones, I'll call it a win for Andrew Berry. Natty tonight. Buckeyes, Notre Dame Fighting Irish. You know, we covered this a little bit with Pete on Friday. Again, if Notre Dame's going to try to play man coverage in this game, this thing can go sideways and quickly. You know, Mbeka and, you know, Jeremiah Smith, there's just no answer for these guys in man-to-man coverage. These guys are NFL wide receivers. You don't have many guys in college football that are just able to take these guys on one-on-one all day long. And that's not even factoring in, you know, the running attack, you know, where, you know, Travion Henderson is right now with his game. You know, Will Howard, this is the potential of a portal dream. Well, I guess for him and Riley Leonard, this is the portal dream. You go to a school, you get the opportunity to show out and maybe get to the Natty. And it's all here for Ohio State. You know, whatever happened in Eugene, Oregon, whatever happened against the Michigan fight, you know, the Michigan Wolverines, it's all in the past. And this was all stuff that looks really, really bad at the time for the Ohio State Buckeyes. But you were here, and you were one game from immortality. You have the better talent. You have the better team facing this Notre Dame squad. Ooh, they're tough. They run the ball well. They play some good defense. If Ohio State can get to, I'd say the number for me would be about, I'd say 24. They can get to about 24 points. I think that's a number that Notre Dame just cannot match against their defense. So I think we should be in for a good one. And it's certainly been a great weekend of football. We'll close that out here on Monday night with the national championship. But I'll be stunned, absolutely stunned, if the college football national championship is not coming back to Columbus, Ohio. Go Bucks. This has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. Browns 3D on the OBR, and we will talk to you all tomorrow.